This is a production of O'Brien Communications.
Hello, friends. I'm Tim O'Brien. If you know parents of school-age children, you may have heard them talk about the many options they now have for educating their kids, from public schools to private schools, from homeschooling to charter schools. And depending on where they live, they may have vouchers that give them even more control, more of a say in what schools their kids attend. One thing is certain, increasingly, you don't have to send your kids to the closest public school to where you live. That's what we're going to be talking about today, why school choice is gaining so much traction. Meanwhile, if you're watching on YouTube or Rumble, make sure to hit that subscribe button. And if you're listening, wherever you're listening, give us a good rating and review. Today, we're joined by Patrick Wolf. He's a distinguished professor of education policy. He's the 21st Century Endowed Chair in School Choice in the Department of Education Reform at the University of Arkansas College of Education and Health Professions. Before this, he taught at Columbia and Georgetown Universities, and he's been a visiting scholar at the Brookings Institution. As principal investigator of the School Choice Demonstration Project, Patrick has led evaluations of school voucher programs in Washington, D.C., Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and the great state of Louisiana. Hey, Patrick, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me on.
I appreciate your taking the time. This is really a hot issue, and we hear a lot of talk about school choice, but I wanted to start with a very basic question, and that is, could you tell us what school choice is in terms of the public dialogue right now? Because someone might think, well, we've always had school choice. I could always send my kid to a private school. What's the difference now?
So school choice is an umbrella term for any situation where parents can choose an alternative to their assigned neighborhood public schools. But in the common parlance of today, school choice more specifically refers to government programs that provide resources to parents so that they can choose a private school for their child. So it's specifically focused now on private school choice, and that comes in the form of private school vouchers, tax credit funded scholarships for tuition and fees, but also the most exciting form of school choice to emerge is education savings accounts, where parents are given a portion of the resources that the government would spend on them in public schools, and they can spend those funds, direct those funds to a variety of education providers and education products to fully customize the education of their child.
When you talk about these savings accounts and even the vouchers, what kind of dollar figures do you typically see? Is there an average dollar figure? I know it might change from state to state given the cost involved, but what are the dollar figures for, let's say, a family that has one child and they want to get a voucher or an education savings account?
Yeah, so the government provided school vouchers typically run about $6,000 to $7,000 a student. That's less than half of the amount that the government typically pays to educate a child in public schools. The tax credit scholarships often are even lower than that. They're typically $4,000 to $5,000 per student. And they're just funded on the tax side as opposed to direct government appropriations. The education savings accounts, many of them are getting to be somewhat more generous in their funding, in the $7,000 to $8,000 range, but still, in all cases, it's only a portion of the amount of funding that would be spent on a child in a neighborhood public school.
Yeah, I have some statistics I wanted to run by you because that basically prove the point here, and that is that school choice is gaining traction in the country. And you've been involved with this for years, so you've seen it when it wasn't so popular, and now it's becoming more popular. Can you tell us why? Why is school choice all of a sudden a hot topic in so many states?
So there are a couple of reasons. One is that choice has always been popular in America, right? We value choice, we value the freedom to choose things, so long as our choices don't negatively affect other people. And so just the whole idea of choice in education has a certain credence with the American public. But the school choice movement has really caught fire in the wake of the pandemic, because the public school system demonstrated itself to be unresponsive to parent and student needs when COVID required a temporary shutdown of schooling. Parents were eager to get their child back in school. There's lots of evidence that showed that children were much less likely to catch the COVID virus, and if they caught it, were highly unlikely to suffer serious health consequences. And yet, still, the public schools stayed closed for much longer than they needed to, and children suffered serious learning loss as a result of that. And a second factor related to COVID was when the schools were shut down, children were educated through remote instruction, and parents got a pretty good idea of what was and wasn't being taught to their children in school, and many of them objected to the curriculum and to the quality of the teaching that was being delivered, and started to question whether public school was the best place for their child. And that these forces, choice, the shutdown of schools, and the ability to look under the hood and see some things that parents didn't like in the instruction of their children. Those three factors really coalesced to instigate what my former student Corey DeAngelis now calls the parent revolution, the push for school choice that has emerged over the last couple of years.
You mentioned what he called it. There's also a term that's emerged out of this, and it's called educational freedom. And could you explain the thinking behind that?
Yeah, so educational freedom, the idea is that parents should have the ability to select a schooling environment that is consistent with their preferences and that reinforces their values. That's really kind of the core of education freedom. It was assured, at least initially, in a very famous Supreme Court case in 1925 called Pierce versus the Society of Sisters, where the state of Oregon banned private schooling. So all private schools in Oregon had to shut down as a result of legislative action. And a group of nuns who taught Catholic schools, who ran Catholic schools in Oregon, sued the state. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and in a unanimous decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that states cannot ban private schooling. Parents have to have that choice. And there's a very famous line from that court case, and it is that the child is not the mere creature of the state. And that's really the foundation of parental rights in education, is that parents stand for the interests of their child, and the state can't countermand that unless there is clear evidence of abuse or neglect. So education freedom is tied to those ideas and really has its roots in that 1925 Supreme Court case.
Well, you can see that. And also, I mentioned that school choice is gaining in popularity. I'll go through those statistics I just mentioned. 11 states have passed laws making public subsidies for private schools. That could be, as you said, vouchers, education savings accounts, or even tuition tax credits for school choice. That's the number I have is 11 states, but it's kind of fluid because there are so many states now that are either actively looking at it. There's legislation that's in process. And I'll go through some of those states because there's a good chance people watching or listening live in any of these states. And that is Arkansas, Alabama, Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Minnesota, Mississippi, Missouri, Montana, New Hampshire, New Jersey, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Rhode Island, South Carolina, Tennessee, Utah, West Virginia, and Wyoming. That's a good chunk of the country. And I live in the state of Pennsylvania, and I'm hearing that Pennsylvania is looking at a softer version of it. So I'm sure all those factors you mentioned are the drivers. It's now sort of taking off. Politicians aren't smart. They know what their voters want, and they're starting to look into this. But there is one very powerful group now that is trying to oppose this. And I'm not sure if it's the only one, but it's clearly the biggest one. And that is the teachers' unions. So do the teachers' unions have a case here in saying that you're taking resources away from the public schools and you're actually hurting certain at-risk parts of the community by taking those resources away from the public schools?
So I think there's an important distinction between publicly supported education and public schools. Basically, we are committed as a society to support the education of every child until the age of 18. But it doesn't necessarily, public schools, government-run public schools don't have to be the exclusive delivery mechanism for that public education. Students can get a public-spirited education even from a private provider, from a public charter school, from a private school, et cetera. And my research team just completed a study, a statistical meta-analysis that we call the public purposes of private education, where we looked at all the evidence regarding the effect that private schooling has on civic outcomes. And, preparing the next generation of citizens, that's a very important responsibility of public schools. And we found that private schools actually are associated with better civic outcomes than the government-run public schools. So you can get a public-spirited education from a private school. In terms of the money that's involved, well, there's a strong case can be made that we appropriate money for education in order to educate students. So that money should be connected to the student, not to the organization that they originally enroll in. So if the student switches from a public school to a private school, from a charter school to a private school, those funds should follow the student to the extent possible to the school that they are in, because those funds are to support the education of that student. Now, in reality, public school dollars are sticky. Basically, only about half of the funding that government-run public school districts receive is based solely on student enrollment counts. About half of it comes in lump sums from grant programs, from property taxes in the community. All the property taxes in the community for education go exclusively to the public schools, no matter how large their enrollments are. So when a student switches out of the public school system, initially none of that money follows the student. None of the money that had been appropriated for that child leaves the school system immediately, because the per pupil funding that does exist for the public schools is based on prior year enrollments. So there's a lag. So they don't lose any dollars the first year. Second and third year, they start to lose a portion of the funding for that student that they are no longer obligated to educate because they're in another school. So this buffer is created. This gives public schools an opportunity to improve their performance when they're losing students to choice. And it gives them the resources to do that too. And the most compelling finding on the research on school choice from 27 out of 30 studies of this question is that the student test scores in public schools go up when those public schools face competition from the launch or expansion of school choice programs. And in part, that's because they aren't, the money, the resources don't immediately leave, even when the student leaves.
That's an interesting concept, and it's worth reinforcing that basically what's happening is two things. Is you're giving someone a choice to go to a better school than they may be attending, get a better education. And the other thing is you're introducing this concept of competition that public schools have never had in the past. And any organization, whether it's a public school, a nonprofit, or a business, once you introduce competition, you're going to have you're more than likely going to have at least an attempt at improving performance because it's merit based. But I wanted to go back to your to your study. I put that up on the screen whenever you were speaking, but I'll put it back up again. And the title of that study is called "The Public Purposes of Private Education: A Civic Outcomes Meta-Analysis." And I actually have to admit that's the reason I found you. I found your study, and then I found you, and and I thought that study was so interesting because it talks about how public and private schools nurture citizenship, and it compares them, and it talks about how citizenship knowledge is improved by the private schools. So, in digging into that study, how do you define citizenship?
Yeah, we identify 4 general civic outcomes and dispositions that are important for self-government. They are political tolerance, and that is basically respecting the rights and the dignity of people you disagree with. Also, political knowledge, basically being knowledgeable about the government system that you are a citizen of. Political activity, and that's typically measured through voter registration, voting, but also more involved elements of political activity like participating in a demonstration, a rally, giving a public speech, those kinds of things. And finally, voluntarism and social capital, which we generally refer to as civic engagement. I mean, how connected are you with your community? Do you devote your time and energy voluntarily to unpaid work in your community? Ideally, these are the citizen responsibilities of people in free societies is to be tolerant, be knowledgeable of politics, be involved in politics, and also be involved in their communities. So those are all the measures that we identified and that we studied in doing this meta-analysis of the effect of private schooling compared to public schooling on citizenship outcomes.
And the results, according to your study, were that the benefits were, as you said, more political tolerance, which is really good, political participation, as you said, civic knowledge and skills, volunteerism, as you said, and that could be everything from volunteering to get out the vote or whatever. And what you really, I made a note when I read that, and it was basically the kids or the students are more likely to get involved and become part of the solution. And I think that's, it's in a democratic process, which also begs the question, why? Why do you think that the private schools did a better job on this in this whole subject area?
Yeah, I mean, that's the $64,000 question. We don't have solid evidence regarding the specific mechanisms that private schools are using to deliver these better civic outcomes, but we have some hypotheses. And one of our hypotheses is that private schools are voluntaristic communities. So everybody's coming there out of their own free will. And so that's in contrast to assigned public schools where students are forced to attend a particular school and no other school. And so we think that the voluntaristic nature of private schools and public charter schools may be a reason why it's easier for those students to develop the kinds of skills and dispositions for governing in a free society. Is it sort of started with the free choice of their school. Another leading candidate for why private schooling is showing this positive civic effect is because most private schools are values rich. environments. So many of them are connected to a religious organization, so they have a set of religious values that inform the education. And the teachers there are not afraid to engage students on questions of values. The public school system, on the other hand, tries to avoid controversy. And so if you engage students on values questions, you run the risk of getting complaints from parents, from school board members, from politicians. And so there's a sense that that many public schools have become sort of values-free environments, and that's not good training for free citizens. Free citizens have to have the experience of appreciating, having a set of values that they embrace and they appreciate, and appreciating others who have a different set of values. And it looks like private schooling is doing a better job of developing those dispositions, values-based commitments and respect for people who have different values.
You mentioned the public schools are sort of without that. And it makes me wonder what will happen when you start to look at the money basically flowing. So let's suppose it's a Catholic school. We have a lot of Catholic schools where I live. And Catholic schools start getting all this government money because of school choice. And what happens then when the government decides, wait a second, I know you're a Catholic school, but you're getting 30% of your revenue or your tuitions are now coming from state monies. Therefore, you have to comply with certain state rules about religious teachings and freedom of expression that way, freedom of religion. That's a pretty sensitive issue, I would think. How has that been discussed in your circles?
Yeah, so there have been many cases of private school choice programs that are lightly regulated by the government. They basically allow the private schools to maintain their autonomy, choose their curriculum, defend their values. And there are other private school choice programs. The prime example is the Louisiana Scholarship Program, which is a statewide voucher program down in Louisiana. And those are highly regulated private school choice programs where the private schools have to accept any child who wants to attend. They have to administer the state test, which follows the state curriculum. So that pressures them to adopt the state curriculum. And the state even has the authority to declare their curriculum invalid and to force them to adopt a different one. And what we found I led an evaluation of the effect of the Louisiana Scholarship Program on student outcomes. And we found that it actually had, participating in that choice program had a negative effect on student achievement. And that was largely because only 1/3 of the private schools in Louisiana agreed to participate. The regulatory regime scared away the high quality private schools. And so the students really only had the lower quality private schools to choose from. As a result, they actually suffered learning loss from participating in the program. So that's a cautionary tale about high regulation of choice programs. It really destroys the secret sauce that makes private schooling so effective for children and families.
I could see that being one of the big fights over the coming years because of that. But it's not like there's not a precedent, because you have, at the university level, you have so many private colleges and private universities and Catholic run and Christian run organizations and other kinds of colleges that also have charters and values and things like that. And they also take government money. So it's not like there's not a precedent to look to. It's just going to go down at a lower level. Another question for you about that citizenship study that you did. Are there other studies like yours that focused on things like STEM and the impact or the performance of kids in STEM educations in private versus public schools?
Actually, there aren't any that I'm aware of, Tim. That would be a really excellent study to do, since STEM is so important to the future of our economy and our society. We know there's a shortage of highly effective STEM teachers. So it would be interesting to learn if private schools are doing a better job with STEM education than public schools. But I'm not aware of any study that's actually made that specific comparison.
Just I'm going to ask you to step out of your academic researcher and just ask for your opinion. Beyond the citizenship issue again, what do you think? What do you think about the performance academically of private schools? Are they really doing a better job than public schools across the board?
I think they are doing a better job. I mean, we see this in the NAEP scores. The private school students participating in the National Assessment of Education Progress consistently score higher than public school students. Some of that is selection, that higher ability and higher wealth students tend to attend private schools. But private school choice is really leveling the playing field, especially providing private schooling opportunities for low-income kids. And so the private school sector, the student population of the private school sector, is becoming much more like the student population in the public school sector and mirroring it a lot more in terms of measures of student advantage. But I think private schools, because of that autonomy, because of that freedom they're given to select a curriculum that they have confidence in and that their teachers are comfortable teaching, because of the high expectations they tend to hold for students in terms of both behavior and student performance. They hold kids to these high standards, and in most cases, the kids rise to the challenge and are very successful with their learning and with developing lifelong habits that are conducive to success in life: personal responsibility, self-discipline, grit, those kinds of things. We see clear measures of advantages for private schools on those non-cognitive outcomes for kids. So I think private schools are doing a better job of educating kids overall, and it's really helpful that if every family in our community, every parent in our community of a school-age child has the opportunity to select the best school for their child, including private schooling options.
What does the process look like if I'm a parent in a state where there are ESAs, education savings account, or vouchers? How do I apply for something like that? Is it easy to do, or is there a lot of red tape?
It varies by state. There are some states that are pretty laissez-faire about their ESAs program. Arizona is the most hands-off of that, and there are other states that are more hands-on. And West Virginia is probably the most government controlled and government regulated ESA. So in Arizona, there is in all cases you apply through the state. So the state handles applications for the ESA program. It's pretty simple, online or paper and pencil application in most cases, especially in Arizona. And if you are deemed eligible in Arizona, parents get a debit card that has an amount of money preloaded on it. I think it's around $6,000 in Arizona, and they're given instructions about what they can use that debit card for in terms of educational services and supports for their child. Obviously, they can use it to pay for private school tuition, and some parents use the whole debit card just to cover private school tuition. But they can also customize their child's education through tutoring, through online programs and courses, through therapies if their child has a disability. So they can purchase a variety of education-related products and services. And then every year, their account is audited by government officials to make sure they haven't spent money on illegitimate products and services. So that's the Arizona system, the debit card approach. West Virginia is more, their system is modeled more on the health insurance marketplaces under the Affordable Care Act. So what they do in West Virginia is they take applications just as they are verifying that a student is eligible for the ESA program. They also are taking applications from education, product, and service providers, from vendors, to participate in the program. And if they judge the vendors to be legitimate vendors of education products and services, then they make those vendors available on the website. So it's almost like an Amazon.com for education products and services, but it's controlled by the state. And then the student's ESA is on that website as well. And parents really never directly see the money. They just direct the funds out of the ESA account that's on the website to one or more of the education providers that is on the website. So in a sense, the resources stay on the website until the education product has been purchased or the education service has been provided. So that's a more regulated version of the ESA. That's the West Virginia model. Florida's model is a little bit of a hybrid, but maybe leans a bit toward West Virginia. And many of the other states, including my own state of Arkansas, that have enacted and are building toward universal ESA programs, haven't yet decided exactly how their programs are going to work.
And universal, when we talk about universal in this context, what you're basically saying is it's not limited to just kids who are underprivileged or disabled. It's everybody. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, and this is a major change in the school choice policy environment that's happened over the last 2 or 3 years. It used to be that private school choice programs were narrowly targeted to students who were low income, in the inner city, or who had disabilities, and those programs, though worthy and helpful to those disadvantaged populations, had two disadvantages. They were too small to attract the full set of private schools to participate, so the parents didn't have a full panoply of private school choices available to them. And secondly, those programs didn't generate sufficient political following. Basically, they didn't have enough interested parties to defend the programs when they came under political attack. And a good example of that is the Invest in Kids program in the state of Illinois, which is the only private school choice program ever to be eliminated by a state legislature, by state lawmakers. And it was sunsetted in December of last year. It's a narrowly targeted program to low-income kids in the state of Illinois, and tens of thousands of low-income kids are no longer able to attend their private school of choice because the advocacy coalition was unable to persuade policymakers to extend and renew that program. If you have a universal program, you have many more people who are invested in that program, many more voters who are invested in that program, and that makes it easier to sustain.
That's interesting. Well, I know that I brought up those statistics. The source of those statistics was a group called Ed Choice. And they threw another statistic out that really blew my mind when you think about it from a percentage standpoint, because right now, and I'm going to use one little thing, the ESAs, education savings accounts. So right now in 2024, there are 330,000 students using ESAs, according to Ed Choice. Last year, just a year ago, there were 130,000. So that's a jump from 130,000 to 330,000 in 1 year. So if you just go by the rate of that growth, that'll be up to 1 million in no time. And it's just amazing to me. So obviously there is interest in it and there is progress in that area. I have one final question for you, Patrick, and I'm going to put a person's quote up on the screen. She's a beneficiary of school choice. Her name is Denisha Allen, and Denisha is a senior fellow at the American Federation for Children. And this is what she said. She said, "School choice changed my life. It helped me and countless others to succeed academically and break the cycles of poverty." And I really think that says a lot, because she's a huge advocate for school choice because she experienced it as a student. She came from a poor family, and she, through education, not only improved herself, but she's a leader. She's not only founded that organization, she's founded other organizations. She's highly visible and obviously a great ambassador for school choice. So based on that, I wanted to ask you about that. What are your thoughts on the real societal differences that school choice can make for people like Denisha?
Yeah, I know Denisha. She's now Denisha Merriweather because she's happily married. She has a beautiful baby. And as you say, I mean, she's an entrepreneur. She established the Black Minds Matter movement. She is a dynamo. And you know, I'm a social scientist. I'm an academic. I look to abstract away from particularities and look at statistical patterns and such. But every once in a while, I go into the community and I run focus groups and interviews, and I talk to parents and I talk to students and I visit schools. And that's where I really see the true effect of school choice happening in very concrete ways. A colleague, Thomas Stewart, and I co-authored a book called The School Choice Journey a decade ago, based on focus groups and interviews and school visits. And we saw, you know, we basically saw the school choice experience like a journey that a person goes on, where you have to prepare for the journey, you have to collect information, you have to make important decisions about that journey and what course it's going to take and what the destination will be. And then you have to provide guidance when you're on the journey. So parents are guiding their students through this school choice journey, and the students, you know, are the travelers, and eventually get to a very exciting and rewarding place. And that's certainly the case for Denisha. You know, she's one of those people who's going to change the world.
Patrick Wolf, thank you for joining us today.
Happy to be here, Tim.
To learn more about all that we talked about here, please see our episode page at shapingopinion.com. Make sure to leave a rating and review and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Want to connect? Check out our website, shapingopinion.com. Follow us on the X platform, Facebook or Instagram at Shaping Opinion. And make sure to join our Facebook group called Shaping Opinion Podcast Listeners. Shaping Opinion is a production of O'Brien Communications. Copyright O'Brien Communications 2024.